unite and work together if we're all going to get through this.
Sounds like socialism to me.
The amount of people I see talking about socialism positively is actually staggering.
Do you think, do you really think that a proletarian revolution is just around the corner in America?
Grab your pitchforks and stab your mayor.
Your hero, Obama.
He's not my hero.
How heroic he comes
idiot. If Bernie Sanders were president, right, and he wanted to bring the same ideas as for socialism into this country, do you think that we would benefit?
Yeah.
But I just told you Venezuela's eating rats.
But I just want people to have health care. I don't want,
Same thing Hugo Chavez.
Oh my god. You people have, worms in your brain, honestly.
All right. Welcome to The Sensible Socialist, a podcast for the rational left. I'm your host, Kevin, and today's episode is going to be a bit shorter than usual. I have a number of amazing guests and conversations lined up for the next few episodes, but I don't have... I thought that it would be useful to, in the meantime, talk about something that he himself brought up to the fore and talk about everyone's favorite internet troll, Ben Shapiro. If you don't know who Ben Shapiro has been in the political scene for a long time. He's been a writer and editor at a number of different places, including Breitbart. He's got his own thing now. He does his own podcast. He's become part of the intellectual dark web, a la Dave Rubin and Sam Harris and the Weinstein brothers and other people like Jordan Peterson. And supposedly he's involved in that group because, that group is about steelmanning your opponent's arguments and being fair and really, trying to get the truth of issues and things like that. And it always surprised me that Ben Shapiro was included in that because Ben Shapiro is none of those things. Ben Shapiro is an internet troll. He was a troll before, the rise of Twitter or something like that. But he is the king of the straw man and the king of the fallacious argument. So he's had a recently episode of his show that was titled something like Rise of the Socialists or something like that. But he didn't really talk about socialism really in that episode. And I know I've seen a few things, so I went YouTube hunting and I found the following gems. And, these videos are all titled Ben Shapiro Destroys Socialism, or, with destroys in caps. And there's some variation on that. Ben Shapiro destroys SJW Cuck or some bullshit like that. But I started watching the videos and there's a common theme. He's definitely got a sort of main criticism of socialism. So there's all kinds of variations on a theme. But so we'll kind of take a listen and I'll stop and make comments. But notice just how often how Ben Shapiro completely strawmans everything. He doesn't have a single honest thing to say when it comes to socialism. But don't take my word for it. Let's listen to Ben. This is Ben's episode titled Ben Shapiro Debunks 7 Democratic Socialist Myths. Now, it's not Ben Shapiro's, but that's the name of the video that I found on YouTube. So let's take a listen.
Now, in a second, I want to go through some of the myths that surround democratic socialism because there's this new kind of narrative that's being put out by a bunch of folks on the left that democratic socialism is different than socialism, that we ought to take it very seriously, that if you look at the United States, what really is missing is this sense of redistributionist justice, this social justice that we need to bring about. We need to rectify income inequality by moving toward a more equitably distributed resource base. That's what we really need. But that's not really what democratic socialism is about. What democratic socialism is about is a complete takeover of the economy.
Okay, so you heard the beginning of the sort of straw man that's coming out, but what Ben Shapiro did say before then is true. There is a difference between democratic socialism and something like social democracy. And though he kind of put it in the jargon of a sort of right-wing critic, this redistributive justice, I guess. But if you think about it, he is pointing out to something that is true, that there is a difference between socialism and social democracy. So that's about where it ends in terms of where his accuracy is at. So let's keep listening.
So let's jump into 7 myths. Okay, there are 7 myths about democratic socialism that are purveyed by these advocates of the new Democratic Party platform, the Ocasio-Cortezes and the Bernie Sanders. So first, they claim that democratic socialism is not the same as socialism. That is not accurate. So democratic socialism is the idea that it's going to be socialism, but we're going to vote for it. And therefore, it's not really socialism. Well, that's not what socialism means. Socialism is just about the idea from each according to his ability to each according to his need, as ensured by nationalization and centralization of government resources and nationalization of industry.
So right here, you see the first example of how Ben Shapiro really doesn't know what he's talking about. Anybody who even is slightly educated about what socialism means and what it's about understands that it is not the government takeover of resources, period. That is the most simplified and, frankly, strawman version of socialism that one can hear. And so Ben Shapiro is already displaying the fact that he is going to use significant shortcuts to describe what he's going to critique. And so what he's going to critique is not anything that anyone is actually arguing for.
Socialist programs redistribute. Socialist economies abolish private property and nationalize industry in order to redistribute. It's important to differentiate these two things. So, for example, if you have a socialist welfare policy that takes money from some and gives to others, that is a socialist welfare policy. It does not mean you live in a socialist country. The United States is a capitalist country with socialist programs, right? So Medicare is a socialist program of redistribution. Social Security is a socialist program of redistribution. We lie about it and we say that it's you putting the money in and getting it back out, but it's actually a socialist redistribution program. Socialist redistribution programs are socialist. It doesn't make the entire country a socialist country. It makes it a capitalist country with a solid welfare base, which is still not ideal, but we have to be clear about what we are talking about. Right? Nationalized healthcare is socialized medicine, but Canada is not a socialist country. Canada is, in fact, a capitalist country with socialized medicine. It's an important distinction. We need to be clear about that. And when democratic socialists say that democratic socialism is different from socialism, not really. They need to be clear about what they're saying.
So again, this is like half true. He is right that there is a difference between social democracy and socialism, but the idea that the way that he describes it, where there's socialist policies, but socialist policies can be implemented in a capitalist system, he is attempting to make some kind of distinction that is more confusing and just flat wrong than it is helpful. And so the intent is not to educate people there. It's to obfuscate. It's to shadow what's happening so that people go, well, I don't like socialist programs, so I don't like socialism. And that doesn't work. You have to be honest and straightforward with the words that you're using to describe things. A policy that benefits poor people or disadvantaged people is not a socialist policy. It may be a policy that socialists support, but it isn't a socialist policy. A socialist policy would be that which is putting us on the road towards socialism. And Medicare for all is not putting us towards a socialist system. It's maintaining a capitalist system. So it's flat wrong and it's disingenuous.
Myth number 2 is that democratic socialism is not, in fact, use of force. So democratic socialists claim that they aren't for overthrowing democracy. They want industry to just be run by the people. So factories should be run by the workers, and industries should be run by the employees. How are you going to do that, though? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to go out and you're going to vote for the government to take over those industries and basically regulate them into the dust.
Again, another straw man. We're not talking about taking over the means of production in order to give them back to the workers so that we can grind them into the dust. That's not a fair way of talking about it. What we want to do is to be able to use the government's ability to reorient who owns things and who has the right to own things, such that we give the ability for each person who's engaged in laborious activity an ability to run that thing, the enterprise. It is not about creating some kind of dictatorial system that is going to overregulate industries into dust. That's not fair. It's not correct. And it again shows Ben Shapiro's inability to deal fairly with the ideas of socialism.
Okay, that is in fact use of force. Just because you voted for the use of force doesn't mean that the use of force is not being applied. If Colton and I decide that we want to rob somebody else in this room, and so we vote on it, then yeah, you. If we decide that we're going to rob this young lady right here, then that's still theft. right? Even if we vote on it, that's use of force and that's theft, because I assume she's not going to willingly give me her wallet, and she shouldn't, because it's not my money. Okay, so the idea that democratic socialism is not force is, of course, very silly. And socialism always tends to degrade into force, because what happens if the people don't want socialism? What happens if the people vote against democratic socialism?
One wonders here what happens to people who don't like capitalism. They die.
What happens if they vote against nationalization of industry and quote-unquote democratization?
Why quote-unquote?
What if they vote against that stuff? Well, if they vote against that stuff, then it must be because they are emissaries of the evil capitalist system that bred them, and so we must gulag them. We must send them out for re-education to the gulags, or we must liquidate the dissenters.
If there ever was a more disingenuous argument against socialism, that's it right there. That is the derivative of the Jordan Peterson argument. That's the derivative of any lazy argument to the ideas of socialism, that it somehow invariably descends into authoritarian nightmares where our enemies ultimately go to the gulag. Look at what happens to the enemies of the system right now, and the nobility of the system in terms of how it treats its enemies. And secondly, not to be just a sort of whataboutism, is to look at how much force there is every day in our system right now. The idea that instituting a new social system isn't going to use any force is ridiculous. And anyone who argues that doesn't fundamentally understand the role of the government and the role of individuals and the role of movements in creating social change. Not everybody agrees to them. That's the way that happens. The mechanism by which you have to be able to deal with that disagreement means everything. And if you have a good position, you'll be able to handle that. You don't need to send everybody to the gulag. That was an example of not having the right mechanisms and not the right perspective.
Okay, third myth that is pervaded by these pushers of democratic socialism is that socialism is fairer. Right? They say socialism is more fair. The third claim that is made by advocates of democratic socialism is that socialism is fairer. Socialism is not fairer. It is deeply unfair. Fairness rests on the basic idea that you get what you deserve.
Which is exactly the underlying notion of socialism. We're just arguing that people should get exactly what they deserve.
This is why it's really fascinating. There are all these social science studies that demonstrate that people will go out of their way. They will harm themselves in order to punish people who they feel are cheating.
If only the Securities and Exchange Commission was as zealous.
Human beings have an innate sense that it is wrong to take other people's money without proper justification and without any right to that money. Socialism seeks to destroy consequences for actions.
I think that's backwards. I think that Ben means capitalism doesn't do that because we don't consider externalities. We don't punish people who are engaging in wrong behavior. That's capitalism he's talking about.
Charity is based on the idea that we ought to help people in need. Socialism is based on the principle that need creates additional rights. This is a very, very different thing. Charity is about my capacity to give and about my obligation to give. Socialism is about the idea that if I am poor, I now have additional rights that I did not have when I was not poor. Right? Simply by virtue of becoming poor, I now have the ability to steal your wallet. So when I wasn't poor, if I stole your wallet, you would have said that I was a criminal. But now that I am poor and I steal your wallet, well, that's just socialism. Okay, that's deeply, deeply immoral stuff.
Okay, I can't even begin to tell you how wrong this is. A, no socialist argues that. B, what are you talking about? This is the most ridiculous thing, honestly. Like, the only thing more ridiculous is that all your enemies just immediately have to go to the gulag. This is not the idea that because I'm poor, I can steal your money. It's the idea that there's a recognition that there's something fundamentally wrong with the system as it stands, because the system as it stands doesn't do the things that he's talking about. Ben Shapiro is an idealist in two ways. He's a philosophical idealist, meaning that he thinks ideas are the only thing that really matter. But two, he's also an economic idealist. He believes that capitalism is a system that it isn't. He believes that capitalism is like the utopian vision of the most amazing system if everyone had access to perfect information and perfect opportunity and were perfectly rational. And they aren't any of those things. And he's totally being ridiculous in the way that he talks about his the argument against it, because he doesn't have a good argument if he recognized that socialism is actually the intent to impose for the first time the things that Ben Shapiro actually wants. If he realized that, maybe we'd get somewhere, but not with this strawman crap.
A fourth claim that democratic socialists make is that socialism was not present in the USSR or Venezuela or Cuba This is what we call the no true Scotsman fallacy.
No, it isn't. The no true Scotsman fallacy assumes that there is no possibility to meet the burden. There is a possibility to meet the burden. We can show you what it means.
Right? Anything that is bad isn't something that you did. Right? Any communist country that ends in murderous tyranny isn't actually communism or Marxism. Those are just misapplications of the rule. We've never actually tried real Marxism. If we tried real Marxism, you'd actually probably like it. This is an argument that losers make with regard to dating, where a girl says, I don't want to date you because I've seen how you date other people. You're like, right, but you haven't tried it yet.
Again, this is an example of a weak argument against a position that is actually fairly strong. If he understood even the basic notions of Marxism, he would understand what this argument actually is. If he, listened to my 20th century socialism episode, he'd get at least the take that I think. But the very quick of it is that there are really important historical, social, and economic reasons why what happened in the Soviet Union or China or other places happened the way that they did. These are not the result of some flawed ideology. They are the result of a number of different things coming to head at the same time that created the conditions such that those events and instances were able to happen. It's not right. It doesn't justify it, but it isn't a loser argument that makes, the same kind of thing about dating. It's a ridiculous kind of comparison.
If you tried it, then it would be completely different. Your life would be so much better if you dated me. Even though you saw how I used to dine and ditch on my prior girlfriend. That wasn't the real me. Once you get to know the real me, you'll understand that I pay for the best dinners in town. If you believe that guy, you're an idiot. And if you believe socialists who say that USSR, Venezuela, and Cuba are not socialist, you are also similarly an idiot.
Wow. That's the real strength of this argument. That, if you buy that argument, you're an idiot. Period. No argument necessary. Just, you know what? If you buy this argument, you're an idiot. Good job, Ben. Real solid arguing there.
Yeah, the fact is that all of these countries are stated Marxist countries.
Ah, yes. Because if you state you're a Marxist, then you are a Marxist. Got it.
They all ended the same way because when you take socialism to its ultimate extreme, which is nationalization of all industry and shutdowns of private industry through use of government force, you end up in a pretty awful place pretty quickly.
Notice here no discussion of the fact that revolutions coming out during periods of World War, invasions of those countries by other countries, continuous warfare, and all kinds of intrigue and espionage against it. I don't think that that's a fairly fair way to view exactly what happened and what the relationship is between the ideas of communism and the practice of quote-unquote communism in the 20th century.
Which brings us to the fifth claim that democratic socialists make. And this is the claim that they are using most often right now. That is the claim that socialism is what makes Nordic countries awesome. So what they will say, you'll hear Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren all say that when they say socialism, what they really mean is Norway. They don't mean Venezuela, they mean Norway. They don't mean Cuba, they mean Denmark. There are a few problems with this. Okay, the big problem is that, again, they are conflating socialist redistribution programs with socialist economies.
No, they're not. They're conflating social democracy with democratic socialism.
Denmark has socialist redistribution programs. We have to assess whether those are successful on their own merits. Denmark is not a socialist economy. Denmark is a freer economy than the United States. It has higher tax rates. That's the redistributionist part. But in terms of business regulation, in terms of capacity to attract foreign investment with free markets, Denmark is significantly more free than the United States. In fact, in 2015, Denmark's prime minister explained, quote, "I know that some people in the U.S. associate the Nordic model with some sort of socialism. Therefore, I would like to make one thing clear. Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy." This is exactly right. The Heritage Foundation, a right-wing source, this is their ranking of economic freedom. Switzerland, right, ranks 4th. Denmark, 12th. Sweden, 15th. The Netherlands, 17th. The United States, the evil, rapacious, capitalist United States, ranks 18th in economic freedom, according to the Heritage Foundation. Norway, that socialist hotbed, ranks 23rd.
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna give Ben the credit here. He's right. These are not socialist countries. They have social democratic organizations. They've been run by socialist parties who are really social democratic parties who have done the same thing that Bernie Sanders has done. But the thing is that he's right. These are capitalist economies. They are they have the same problems that any other capitalist economy has. Still go into crisis. Still have significant issues of overproduction. Wage increases haven't happened in this most latest period of neoliberalism, and there's been erosion of the traditional power of working class parties and things like that. Now there's been a resurgence of the Labour Party, and there's Syriza in Greece and things like that, which are good things to look at. But he's right in terms of these maintaining a capitalist perspective.
What made all of these countries wealthy, by the way, is the fact that they are capitalist and that they were more capitalist in the past. Capitalism makes countries wealthy. Socialism simply takes all that wealth and redistributes it, shutting down industry in the process.
See, this is where Ben gets into dangerous territory, because I think by talking about more capitalist, does he mean imperialist? So is this an argument for imperialism? I mean, I don't know. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that it isn't. But if you're talking about more capitalist, I know at least you mean less regulation, but do you mean more imperialism?
And here's the proof that all of these countries were doing well long before they had socialism. The proof is that by statistics, this is the case. Number one, by statistics, the case. Number two.
Whoa. Before you go to number two, what statistics? What statistics prove it? I don't know exactly what you're talking about. And what about World War II when the whole damn place was destroyed? I think that you might not be countering that, and the creation of Bretton Woods and all sorts of different systems. So it seems like a pretty huge shortcut to just go, statistics prove it. I'm going to talk really fast, so statistics prove it. Just trust me. Statistics prove it.
If you take all these people from Denmark, from Norway, from Sweden, and you actually transplant them to the United States, they have higher incomes in the United States than they do in all of these other places. They actually earn more, and they do better economically. So the idea that socialism is what creates awesomeness in these cultures is not right. Okay, culture created awesomeness in these cultures, and then socialism was a follow-on that has actually tamped down the economy in these various countries. When you take that culture and you transplant it to a free country like the United States, where tax rates are lower, then all of these cultures thrive in the United States as well.
Culture. The culture of Europe made it wealthy before capitalism? I mean, I don't even know where to begin with that. That is not the case. Other places in the world were more advanced than Europe was at certain periods of time. I mean, it's just not the case. So I don't understand this culture argument. I mean, it's like this weird, I don't know, Eurocentric, Euro supremacist. I don't know what kind of argument this is, but it's not one that makes any sense. The way that Europe became economically powerful was by getting to a capitalist system first, because of the certain conditions in Europe that were developing at the time that capitalism came to the fore. This isn't a question of culture. That's that same kind of philosophical idealism. It's not that. It's the economic conditions. But see, Ben, not understanding Marx, wouldn't know that.
Now, Nordic countries do have high levels of social services because they charge exorbitant taxes. Denmark has a 60.3% tax rate plus a 25% national sales tax, which is why everything costs an arm and a leg in Denmark. Between 2007 and 2015, not surprisingly, Denmark experienced a 5.5% decline in real GDP.
2007 to 2015. I wonder what happened then. Oh, right. The world went into an economic frickin' crisis, Ben. What are you talking about? Of course, what country didn't have China? Why didn't you talk about China? Oh, that's right. That doesn't exactly make your argument. So you're going to cherry pick a statistic that's going to work for you in order to make your bullshit point. That's not fair. And just because you said it very quickly, and so that we didn't know what date it was, but we knew that there were two dates and that it declined in that period of time, that you're assuming that your audience isn't thinking.
Which is comparable to the decline in growth in Spain, which essentially went bankrupt during the same period. The natural result was the election of a center-right coalition in Denmark. Sweden, another supposed socialist paradise, grew because of capitalism. According to an economic scholar named Nima Zananjanji, who is from Norway, between 1870 and 1936, Sweden enjoyed the highest growth rate in the industrialized world. Between 1936 and 2008, the growth rate dropped to 13th out of 28 industrialized nations. Between 1975 and the mid-1990s, Sweden dropped from being the 4th richest nation in the world to the 13th richest nation in the world, and that is a direct result of restrictions on the economy and redistributionist programs. Norway, which is the left's favorite country these days, they moved on from Denmark and Sweden because both of those places have elected right-wing governments now. Norway is propped up by an enormous oil find off their coast, and even their nationalized oil companies, which are now used to prop up their social welfare programs, those companies run along private lines in that the government basically is a major stockholder in these companies, But it's not just government appointees who run the companies. It's people who are supposed to run these along profit lines. The government is not actually allowed to intervene in policy in serious ways in the Norwegian oil industry. It's also worth noting that in Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Norway, the top 10% of wealth owners hold between 65 and 69% of all wealth in those countries. That's actually not that much lower than in the United States. All of these countries were significantly more robust economically before they started with their socialist nonsense. And the idea that high life expectancy in Scandinavia is an outgrowth of socialism is not true. In 1960, Norway had the highest life expectancy in the OECD, followed by Sweden, Iceland, and Denmark. By 2005, the gap between Scandinavian countries and the UK and the US had actually shrunk considerably. That's after the implementation of socialism in a lot of these countries.
So, okay, again, now he's saying implementation of socialism. So have they or haven't they implemented socialism? My God, he can't be consistent at all. Look, have they implemented socialism or not? No. Did they implement a socialist policy? Oh, okay. According to you, Ben, they did. The thing is that the Labour Party in Norway was founded in the late 1880s. The period of time where you had talking about the most growth is when you had these strong Labour parties. So it's just inaccurate. Maybe in Britain, and he's thinking Britain is exactly what's applying to Scandinavia and things like that. But the social democratic process in the Scandinavian countries started around the time that he's talking about the major periods of growth. So he's just wrong about that. But he'll tell you, oh, statistics prove me right. And believe me, because I'm not going to go through the statistics because I want to talk really fast. Nobody ever really wants to look at the statistics. So look, just believe me that when I say the truth and I take a big breath, it's absolutely going to be true. It's a really, really, really disingenuous way of arguing, and it's frankly not true. And if you can take a breath and stop him for a second and go, do you really know what you're talking about? The fact of the matter is it doesn't take very long to realize that he doesn't, that he makes a lot of it up in order to be able to quickly go over it to get to the point. He doesn't take you through the premises of his argument to get to the conclusion. It's premise, conclusion, right? And you're blindsided by everything that he's saying because he talks a mile a minute. It's a very shystery kind of move, and I not only is his information and the last bit of what he's talking about incorrect, it's disingenuous because anybody who's talking about socialism is not arguing for the Nordic model. Now we have the issue of the social democracy socialism thing. I get that. He's right about that issue. Okay, fair enough, but to move into the complaint that, that actually this is really just a success of capitalism and people don't know what they're talking about is a bad move because it's showing that you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know what you're talking about when it comes to Marxism. You don't know what you're talking about to the history of social democracy, and you're just making things up. So it's a very poor argument style, but let's see where it keeps going.
Also worth noting, you can't just take the socialist programs of Norway, which may work for a country of 5.3 million people, and apply them to the United States, where there is not the same level of cultural cohesion, cultural homogeneity, and a history of exactly that sort of cohesion and homogeneity. The population of LA County alone is double the population of Norway.
So what?
You can't just take a program that works for 5 people and apply it to 5 million and expect it to work exactly
of course,
the same way.
It would have to be different.
Okay,
That's
final
ridiculous.
2 myths about democratic socialism. So we are also hearing that democratic socialism is the solution when it comes to the medical industry. What we really need is to nationalize our healthcare system. Now, let's be clear. There are lots of different government schemes with regard to medicine. America's scheme does kind of suck, okay, because it is not a free market system. The great lie about America's medical system is that it is free market. It is not. It is the most heavily regulated area of American life. The profit margins for insurance companies in the health insurance industry are like 2%. They're not that high.
The margins may not be, but the numbers are $6 billion, something like that.
And one of the reasons that the health insurance system sucks in the United States is because of employer-based insurance programs, which were crammed down by the government in the 1950s. Basically, in the 1950s, we had wage controls, and in order to edge around those wage controls to give people raises, companies started paying for their employees' health insurance. But there's no reason that your health insurance should be tied to your job. Really, you should just be paying for your health insurance yourself. That's what happens in Switzerland, which is probably the world's most successful healthcare system. The way that Switzerland works is that you are mandated, just like Obamacare, you are mandated on an individual level to buy your health insurance, but there's no employer-based insurance in Switzerland. Plus, they penalize you pretty heavily if you don't buy health insurance. If you don't buy health insurance and then you get sick and then you go in for care, then they will force you not only to pay a surcharge of like 50% on your health insurance bill, they will also back charge you for all the health insurance you should have been paying for the last several years. Switzerland has a very, very robust program in force to force people to buy their own health insurance.
Wasn't this just the guy who got done saying that something that will work in a place of 5 people won't work in a place of 5 million? Just because it works in Switzerland, why do you think it's going to work here? Isn't that the same argument? Jeez, this is getting easy.
It is also worth noting that all of these other countries that supposedly have wonderful healthcare systems have their drawbacks as well. Canada, of course, has very long wait lines. The same thing is true in the UK. In Australia, a large percentage of the population buys supplemental health insurance on the private market.
Ah, blah, 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 blah. Here he goes. Look, the biggest point is that when you're talking about healthcare, any of the proposals about Medicare for all and all those kinds of things are band-aids. They're band-aids on a system that doesn't work very well. It's the idea that we have to find some other way to be able to pay for this cost that we are all paying, but in a way that is able to really get us the outcomes that we want. We can all know that the system that we have now doesn't work. And Ben, you know what? If you think that the private market would be able to do this, I appreciate your idealism, and there's no reason to think that it has. That there's no reason that it could, because the system has already been attempted, and it hasn't worked, and it's needed to be reformed a number of different times. So I'm not sure that this system that you're proposing, one that we've already tried, is a genuinely workable solution.
Also, it is still true. If you've got the money, America is the best place to be for medicine. If you've got the cash, then America is still the best place to be. It would be even more like that if we would deregulate the system.
Right, and I think that's actually what people don't like about it. I really wish that you understood this. Yes, I don't doubt that if you have the cash, America's a great place to do a lot of things, but that's the point.
Okay, final lie that democratic socialists tell is that capitalism is a giant failure. This is the dumbest argument of all. Capitalism is the most dramatic success in the history of the world. People living on $1 a day or less, that fell from about 27% of the global population in 1970 all the way down to 5.4% in 2006. That's an 80% decline. Poverty worldwide included 94% of the world's population in 1820. In 2011, it was down to 17%. Mortality rates for kids under the age of 5 declined by nearly half between 1990 and 2013. Virtually no American lives in poverty by global standards. So the third plank of the Democratic platform, which is this economic democratic socialism, it's a giant fail. It's a giant fail on every score. And the fact that it's even being considered by the Democrats demonstrates how far left they have moved right now.
All right, so that's the end of Ben's diatribe, and there are parts of it that we have to be honest about, and that we're not horrible, but the long and short of it is, as I said several times, I think that Ben Shapiro in particular has a very disingenuous argumentation style. I think that he is a troll, and I think that he doesn't actually have a lot of the facts to back up some of the things that he is talking about. He's not wrong all the time. I'm not going to be mean. I'm just saying that I think that there's a lot of disingenuousness that goes on in the way that he really tries to argue some of these points. That last bit about capitalism not being a failure is exactly the same kind of thing. No one who understands anything about economics will argue that capitalism hasn't achieved some things. It has. It has achieved some significant amounts of development, some very laudable things. The whole first part of the Communist Manifesto is a praise of capitalism. So it's just not the case that socialists only argue that capitalism has failed. It's that there are problems with capitalism that have shown themselves multiple times and have come at significant costs. There is development that happens in socialism, or in capitalism, that we have to admit. But those are not unlimited, and they are not without costs. And the costs that have been paid to get that kind of development have been huge, and they are no longer necessary. And I think that what Ben Shapiro fails to understand is that the critique of capitalism is not that capitalism has always been a failure and has always been something bad. It is not that. That is the most unsophisticated strawman version of the argument. The argument is that capitalism has played its role in human development. It has done a lot of good things. It has gifted us with a amazingly productive system that we can grab hold of and democratize in a way that is able to produce an equality of opportunity and an assurance of an outcome that is worthwhile. It's not equality of outcome, but it's equality of opportunity. It's genuine freedom. It's genuine democracy. These are the ideals of socialism, not because the only thing that motivates socialism is the ideas, but because the ideas of socialism are not based naked force about throwing people in gulags to enforce some kind of class hatred. That is not the system that we want to propose. The system that we are proposing and the system we want to institute is a system that is based on genuine freedom, genuine cooperation, genuine organization, genuine participation, and a way that is able to make it so that not if you have the money, you're able to get access to something like healthcare, but because you're a fucking human being, you do. And so I think that it's very important that we dissect some of these arguments of people coming out like Ben Shapiro and, the intellectual dark web. Look, you have people like, Brett Weinstein, who I think may not call himself a communist because he sees communist as utopian. And I think that it's an interesting way of talking about it, but he's definitely not a right-wing apologist like Ben Shapiro is. And I think people like Dave Rubin have become more like that. And, Sam Harris can be very annoying to talk to but that's the sort of representation of peak liberalism. So what I appreciate in the intellectual dark web is the fact that there is diversity among them. But what I don't like about the intellectual dark web is that there is this inclusion of people like Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin, who I think are very disingenuous actors, who do a significant amount of baiting of different kinds of arguments, non sequiturs and fallacious thinking, and then criticize their opponents of doing the same thing. I just did it, I guess, so maybe I'm guilty of it too. Hey, I don't know. But you know what? I would love to talk to Ben Shapiro about this. I think that he could really use an education from somebody who's maybe more qualified like me, like David Harvey or Richard Wolff, or a number of different people who I think would be able to better express these views. But not to be disingenuous and not to strawman these arguments. The whole idea of that intellectual dark web is to not do that. And this, I think, it encapsulates it pretty good. But this has been Shapiro's, his straw man for the. Or his steel man, for socialism is the moral argument. Now that's his biggest critique, that it's immoral, right? It's just immoral to be able to take money from someone even if you vote on it. The irony being that that's the exact criticism of capitalism that socialists have, that there's a theft happening economically, and it's what makes people poor, but it isn't by virtue of you being poor that it's happened. It's the thing that happens that makes you poor. And that's something that Ben just doesn't understand. And so even his steel man is the weakest steel man because it's his strongest critique. So I don't think that he's being necessarily fair. And I think that there are much more sophisticated critiques of socialism. I think those should be discussed. And I just want to put a plug out there that the Sensible Socialist will be having a capitalism versus socialism debate. Just contacting everybody now and trying to put that all together. Likely going to be sometime in the month of September. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out. And until next time, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.